The people that were talking about their lives, all the documentary interviews, I thought were very insightful in terms of their mentality at the time and sort of how they viewed what it would be presenting this representation on screen for one of the first times, how that would reflect on culture writ large and how it ended up happening as they look back on it in the past. I thought it was a really interesting dynamic in terms of building a sense of community and camaraderie amongst that group. And I thought that the show worked well thematically to match that. And I thought the documentary was very sort of highly attuned to sort of the implications of how important what was going on was. So it worked both from the documentary standpoint, but I thought it worked with using the actual episode at the end, sort of reflecting a way to give the piece more representation, trying to have a more cultural consciousness built around it because it was such a historical production at the time. So I thought it was well done, had a good sense of humanity that I thought worked well in making the characters compelling and easy to connect with. And I thought that the piece had a good mix of documentary style and sort of a mentality of an artistic pursuit to make a point on culture and society writ large.
The 1970s, you have characters like Abigail, who's straight, apologizing to the gay man she loved for outing him, which is amazing to see such acceptance and willing to change and apologize and admit to one's mistake. Like, that's so mature of her character. Something I don't even see in today's shows because it's usually a running plot line to have homophobic characters. It for sure had unsettling moments like the grandma calling queers unwell or the male gaze sexualizing lesbians, but still, that sort of progressive acceptance is rare, even in this time. Another thing that stood out to me is when one of the guest speakers said there's females are villains, victims, and vixens, and men are rapists, etc. It's still like that in today's age. It really is. In media, it's running plot lines, it's personalities for some characters, and I really hope that does change and we get more progressive, as clearly Australia has in the 1970s, and we should have been long changed in the USA.
Didn't know how progressive the Australian media was so long ago, and that's just, it's so cool to see that. I really liked how this documentary or this film was set up, that we actually got to kind of like watch episodes and see the dynamic between these characters. Like, it's even now it still feels so radical, and this was so long ago, and then also getting the modern day commentary on that was really, really cool. And yeah, Australia's just kind of like been doing it right in some ways for quite a while, and I think that that's really cool. And queer people have always existed, and it's really cool to see that there was representation, and not only was there representation, but it was embraced, and people were really loving these storylines and these characters.
It shows how Australian TV made such bold choices in terms of showcasing homosexual representation on TV. And these characters really set a standard that was ahead of a lot of others of its time. You have people from the community giving rundowns on these top moments in TV. And the majority of this doc is a selection of clips from these various shows that fit the criteria. But the personal touch that really made it unique was people telling their own personal stories about how certain characters affected them. And then getting to see that character's clip played out and see how it's all tied together. I thought that added just a very nice special touch to this.
It's interesting to see how two different countries progress, and yet still there are different intricacies that happen within them. We see what queer culture was like in the 70s as Australia had this huge impact on how we started seeing LGBTQ relationships within the media and how we deal with our patriarchal society and the male gaze when it comes to women, when it comes to lesbians being vixens and victims of the sort. So it's really interesting to see how you get the voice of many in this piece, and ultimately we get to see how we still have work to do, how we still need to move forward, and how we have these certain relationships and making sure that they don't fall into tropes. That's the whole point when it comes to filmmaking. There are these moments in history that are big moments. And like me personally, I think of, the US media and history because that's where I kind of connect with. So it was really interesting to be able to turn around and see not only history but queer history in such a niche environment, and kind of be able to compare it to how we are. And that's how we ultimately end up inspiring others to do change, is to take examples from other moments of life and to be able to shape it into your own.
We understand how the Australian TV was one of the pioneers in queer television in the world back in the 70s, in the late 60s, early 70s. Although there were TV shows already about queers in UK and USA, but still in those countries they kept always saying like they were not queer. Like although it was clear that the show, most of these shows were queer, they just kept saying that it wasn't a queer show, it was just all part of the story. Whereas Australian was more pioneer and yes, admitted to have queer TV shows from the beginning, which was quite outrageous, as the title says, back in the day for the rest of the world. But also how Australian TV tackled this, being part of the LGBTQ plus community. So introducing characters that behave normally, not like stereotypical queer character that people would expect, like always over the top, always basically what people back in the day would expect someone to be queer to act in a certain way. Whereas here they introduce characters that seem absolutely completely straight, but in the end they are queer because they're living obviously their queer life. So I think the short was very powerful.
I found this documentary and presentation of the series to be really interesting and really fascinating. It's a topic that I've never heard about, and I've never heard about the TV series, and so it was really interesting to hear it be explored, and I think the way that it was explored too was really, really fascinating and interesting.